Hello everybody, this is Dr. Cole. It's Monday morning, April 18th. We're now entering week 14 of Political Science 3143 Comparative Governments for the spring 2022 term. Everyone, on the syllabus for this week we have China and we have a discussion about Russia. That will be discussion 6, starting tomorrow, Tuesday through Thursday. By the way, everybody, before I go any further, I should mention, I'll have more to say about this over the next week or two. We have 3.5, 4 weeks left in the term. Grades are due Saturday, May 14th. So you should be thinking about country reports if you have not done so already. I believe the way we wrote the syllabus, to be on the A track for the course and to be eligible for an A, you need to submit a country report. Okay. We tried to get a message out to you earlier, discussing several different countries you might consider. If you would like to correspond with me about that via email, I'd be happy to do so about the choice of country you might want to look at. But anyway, as I was saying, we have China on the syllabus this week, and we have a discussion about Russia beginning tomorrow through Thursday. That will be discussion 6, and after that we have one more discussion and one more quiz, and that will do it for quizzes and discussions for the term. All we'll have after that is the country report and the final exam. We had Russia on the syllabus last week. We sent you some material about what's going on in Russia in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine. And it's interesting to consider, think about what we might do if we were in this situation. Apparently, affluent professional people in Russia are drawing the conclusion that their future, if they stay in the country, is going to be exclusively within Russia, more or less, because the ties that Russia enjoyed to the rest of the world largely been shut down due to sanctions. And so some people are facing the decision of either looking at leaving the country if they feel that strongly about it, or making their peace with the Putin regime and the decisions that President Putin has made about going into Ukraine, among other things. So it'd be interesting to look at that material. 2 articles, one very brief and another longer blog post that I've sent you. It's been widely commented upon in the international press. Interesting to look at that and discuss. Worthwhile reflecting on what we might do if we were in the same situation. Okay, so that would be tomorrow through Thursday. Post initially and then respond to your classmate before the end of the discussion period, and I'll try to have some things to say as well. All right, on China, we'll have a discussion related to China next week. Say a few words about China. China has a government very similar to what the Soviet Union used to have before the Soviet Union collapsed. There's a state apparatus and a government, and then parallel to that, kind of shadowing it, is the party apparatus of the Chinese Communist Party. It sort of rides herd, of course, on everything that goes on in China. I once had a Chinese exchange student decades ago at another institution I was working for, and I mentioned at that time to this student, you might be able to influence the direction of the government of China, but it would involve working your way up through the ranks of the Chinese Communist Party, and that might be very difficult to do because they do everything they can to impose top-down control. It's difficult to do that in a country as big as China, of course. So it's difficult to describe it as a absolutely totalitarian dictatorship because it's hard to pull off such a thing in a country of 1.4 billion people. Upon the death of Mao Zedong 3 or 4 decades ago, the Chinese communist revolutionary leader who led the communists to defeat after the end of to victory after the end of the World War II and drove the nationalists off onto the island of Taiwan. After his death, China, of course, reformed economically due to the influence of politician Deng Xiaoping. And as we know, economic growth and prosperity in China has accelerated dramatically and has been perhaps the major development in the world the past generation or so. You could say, everybody, we could do to spend more than 1 week on China. We could perhaps spend 2. We cannot do that, as it so happens. But it might be worth doing just because there's so much going on in China and its impact on the rest of the world is so significant. So, due to the influence of Deng Xiaoping after Mao's death, China reformed economically. And we know it's been described as the world's workshop. Our stores are full of goods from China, which some people see as a problem. Okay. China did not reform politically nearly to the same extent that it did economically speaking. In fact, the leadership of China does not want to do that, by all appearances. They disparage Western-style democracy. They want to say that our elections are a rich man's game or such things. They think they have a superior form of democracy. And that's what we're going to ask you to discuss next week. What if you encountered someone who felt that way, someone from China perhaps, and you may meet such people, because China and the United States are still interconnected to a huge extent, even though relations have grown more tense over the past decade or so. So China reformed economically, but not politically, trying to take a course opposite to what the Soviet Union did. As you may know, before the end of the Cold War, just before the Soviet Union collapsed, President Gorbachev tried to introduce perestroika and glasnost, terms from the Russian language. Perestroika meant economic reform. Glasnost meant more political openness. And as I think I mentioned to you in the class notes, many people feel that that openness loosed forces that contributed to the breakup of the Soviet Union. So the Chinese authorities did not want that. They wanted economic reform, but not political reform. However, if you traveled to China, and it'd still be the case if you traveled to China today, on the surface at least, you might get the impression that you live in a fairly open society similar to the Western countries. The thing is, the people have figured out there's a point beyond which they cannot go. There's a lively press that reports entertainment news, human interest stories, and relatively non-political stories about corruption in the government. But they cannot go so far as to challenge the government or the predominance of the Communist Party. In the past decade or so, under President Xi, who some people think wants to become a kind of authoritarian or perhaps even totalitarian dictator and create a kind of a cult of personality around himself, President Xi has cracked down and moved China in a somewhat more authoritarian direction under his presidency. He aspires now to a third term, to which he will be apparently elected or chosen later this year in a Chinese Communist Party confab. Previously, there had been an expectation that presidents of China would serve only a 5-year term, one at a time, and then step down. But he's going to be moving on into his third term. President Xi began his presidency with a crackdown on corruption, but many people feel that that was simply a cover for an overall authoritarian crackdown in Chinese society. President Xi seems to feel that China perhaps has become not communist enough. Now, there will still be a private sector because he realizes that that is what's undergirded much of the prosperity and economic growth that China has enjoyed. But we mention at the very end of the class notes that there have been some efforts to crack down on certain corporations and certain segments of the economy, especially the tech sector, to keep them from getting, shall we say, too big for their britches. We discussed that at the very end of the class notes. So there's a fair amount of tumult going on in China. There's been increasing tension between the United States and China over the past decade or so, over, among other things, human rights violations, especially in the northwest of China, where China has cracked down in a very, shall we say, ugly way on the Muslim Uyghur minority in northwest China, and other human rights issues that cause a concern to Western governments. There's recently been a COVID outbreak in China, and the whole city of Shanghai has been locked down, 25 million or more people. There's been some pushback against that in China, apparently. So, a country that has reformed considerably over the past generation, that still employs a government structure very similar to the old Soviet Union, and in which President Xi has come to power and seems to want to move it in a more authoritarian direction over the past decade or so. So, look at the class notes over China. We'll have a discussion on China next week, and we have a discussion on Russia this week. So, think about your country reports, and if you want to correspond with me about that, I'd be happy to get back to you on that. Meanwhile, I hope you will take part in these discussions, and we'll talk to you a bit more about, we'll talk a bit about China and as well India in a few days over this coming weekend. Take it easy.